Welcome back to MVM. Today we have a Kickstarter preview. This one is for Chartered: The Golden Age. It's from Jolly Dutch Games, and it's a 2 to 6 player stock manipulation game set in sort of an old school environment.
So this one takes place in the 1600s Amsterdam, and if the rules are right and history is correct, this is the first time in history that stocks were traded. So you're going to be representing a merchant, so to speak, and you're trying to buy stocks in each of these individual enterprises. There's 9 enterprises in the game, and they represent things like silver and gold, pepper, tea, and so forth. This is all going to go up and down through the course of the game as you buy and sell stock. And at the end of the game, you're just trying to have the most money.
Yeah, and what we have set up here is kind of an end game state. This is a 3-player game after all of the buildings have been put on the board. Of course, in a real game, all of these stocks would be in front of a lot of players too, but we have them around the bottom of the board.
The other thing we should note is that the game itself is going to be highly variable from the very start of the game, depending upon the number of players. The side of the board that you play on is going to be dictated by the number of players participating, how many cards you're going to play with, how much money you start with, how many of these warehouse buildings are going to start in the pool off to the side, because that's going to be one of the end game triggers. When all those warehouses are used, the game is going to end.
Yeah, so in addition to all of these buildings that you see here, and the board, of course, there's going to be these main cards. And in this deck, there's a few different types of cards. The one that you're going to use the most is a numbered card. Each card, there's 1 for 1 associated with all the numbered spaces on the board. Like Jeremy said, it's variable setup, so depending on what side of the board you use, you're going to use very specific cards. In addition to that, there are going to be some cards that allow you to expand your enterprises. These are floor cards. That's the other card in here in the basic version. And then finally, there's event cards. We have some set off to the side here, but those are going to be shuffled into the deck if you want to use them. They sort of inject some randomness and some things that you have to deal with, just like the stock market.
One thing that should be noted also is that each of these different building plot cards only have 1 card per land of plot. So you know that when you play that card, or when you need that card, there's only 1 of those in existence. So there's some strategy on when to use cards, when to hold those cards back at any given point. So as we said, the game is going to be seated with a completely empty board at the start. Each player is going to start with an X number of random cards. The stock market, all of these different stocks are going to start at a 0 price because there's nothing on the board at that given time. Each player is also going to start with some money to start their progression within the game. Now, that money is going to depend again on the number of players participating. The game itself is incredibly easy to play. There's only 2 things you're actually going to do on your turn. The first one is to buy a building card from the row that you see here. This row is going to exist with an X number of cards depending on the number of players. We have 3 players, so there's 4 cards here. On my turn, I can spend 50 francs in order to buy any one of these cards that are face up, or one of the top card, or the top card itself, and put that into my hand. That's basically the turn. If you take one of the cards here, it's going to be replaced from the top card. Anytime an event comes out and is seeded into this area, the event's going to take place. These events, as David alluded to, they do a variety of different things. Mostly they're going to manipulate the stock price. They can force players to sell some of the stocks that they currently have at that given time.
Yeah, for instance, here's one here, and most of these are also going to affect all the players at the table. They're basically a general effect. This one allows all enterprises gain 10 value, so everything on the stock market's going to go up. And of course, there's some that do the very opposite of that. There's some that force you to sell stocks and whatnot.
So that's the first thing you can do. The second thing is the more complex action, and that is actually playing a building card from your hand.
Yeah, when you play a building card from your hand, it might sound simple, but there's a lot of things that you can do. The very first thing that's probably going to happen, though, at the beginning of the game is someone's going to play a number, and on that number, you're going to found a new enterprise. At the beginning of the game, all of these enterprises are going to have these special warehouses on their actual stock certificates. At that point, someone plays a card, they're going to take a normal warehouse, place it on that number, and then you get 2 free warehouses to place on either each side of it or to one side or the other. There are some placement rules you have to follow. You can't build within certain amount of spaces to another existing enterprise. So like Jeremy said, as you collect these one-of-a-kind cards in your hand, you're going to want to take note where you can and can't found new enterprises. Then finally, you're going to take that cap signifying the particular stock or commodity and place that on one of the warehouses that you placed. You're going to have basically founded an enterprise that's worth 30 on the stock exchange. So you're finally going to take that commodity, place it on the 30, and then from that point forward, it's obviously going to grow in value.
Yep, the other option you can do with the building cards is build onto a pre-existing enterprise by using that card to build onto the sides of it or to build up vertically on that particular enterprise. Now, a couple things can happen here as well. You can play the card itself that has that number, or you can play a floor card that's going to add a second, third, or fourth floor. Now, these don't have to be paired with a numbered card. That's the great thing. You can build onto any place that would need a second floor, any place that would need a third floor, fourth floor, and there's even one fifth floor. What that's going to do, and we'll talk about them individually, if you build a floor level, it's going to increase the stock price by however many floors it was. So if, for instance, I build onto the coffee with a fifth floor, it's going to increase the coffee 5 times,
right,
so to speak. So that's the great thing about playing the floor ones. If you play just the building, and I had the number, say, for instance, 29, and wanted to build onto this location, it's only going to increase it by 1, so to speak.
Exactly. The other benefit of doing that, though, is that you're going to want to spread things out, because eventually we're going to get into mergers, and we'll talk about that in a second.
The great thing, too, is that when you actually build onto those locations, either building a new location or starting your own enterprise, you're immediately going to cash in that kind of money. So, for instance, when David started his new pepper, he would gain $30. If I were to add on to coffee and move it up maybe once, I would gain $400. So you want to obviously start adding warehouses to large enterprises at that given point. Also, if you are the first person to build an enterprise, you're also going to gain a free stock, which we forgot to
exactly.
mention.
When you found a new enterprise, you get a free certificate of that stock, which is a nice thing to get, because the last thing you can do on your turn, and this is only if you've played a card out of your hand, is to trade stocks. And it comes in one of two fashions. First, you can trade up to 2 stocks. Now, trading means either selling or buying. So at that point, you can look at the stock chart and buy whatever stocks you want or sell whatever stocks you want, but only up to 2. So I could buy 2 coffee, I could sell 2 coffee, I could buy a coffee and sell a silver, anything like that. Basically to manipulate the money you have in front of you to do more throughout the game.
Plus, you're constantly watching which of these enterprises are growing financially, so you want to have some investment in those when they cash in from a couple different things, either at the end of the game or a merger. Now, this is the hardest thing to explain. The mergers are going to happen when you place a building warehouse structure between 2 pre-existing enterprises. For instance, we have coffee right here, and then we have gunpowder right here. If a 28 were played, this is going to merge these 2 together. What you're going to look at is the stock prices for each of these different companies. The larger one, of course, is going to consume the smaller one. What's going to happen at that point is, if, say, for instance, I haven't counted the numbers here, but say if gunpowder was larger than coffee, what's going to happen is the coffee player, or the players that have coffee stock, are going to have to sell off all of their coffee for whatever the value is at that given point. If you have a flag, which we will mention in just a moment, that is worth additional stocks. Then what's going to happen is all of that money that coffee was worth is going to be consumed into the other franchise or enterprise at that given time. So this is how you can start to see how investing in certain ones and kind of watching which numbers still have to appear, which numbers you may have and holding on to be able to get those mergers to happen at specific points in the game.
Yeah, and what's also interesting about that is then the coffee warehouse comes off the board again. Yeah. All the stocks are off the board again. And of course, that's open to be reestablished at that point. So if you're sitting on a bunch of coffee stock, obviously it was just liquidated, but you can sort of rekindle the coffee market again by establishing that somewhere else on the board, unless you want to establish something else. We mentioned the flags a second ago. That is another type of stock. They call it a flag stock that you can acquire. So at the end of your turn, if you've played a card, you can either trade 2 stocks or you can acquire a flag stock. The first flag stock you acquire is 200 and the next one is 400. This has to be purchased in the establishment or the enterprise that you just either built or expanded on. But again, like Jeremy said, if you expanded on a big coffee enterprise, you might want to spend the money, if you have it, to buy a flag stock because it's worth 4 stocks whenever that might be liquidated or sold off at the end of the game.
The other most important thing to talk about is that it is possible for 3 different enterprises to merge And this can only happen on very specific locations, which are these corner sections where 3 of them could be built. If that happens, the player that merged those together has the option of merging 2 of them together and then the last 2. So there's a chance for a very large corporation to get consumed by 2 smaller ones if they merge first. So one of the unique things that can happen in the game as well.
Yeah, it brings in an interesting strategy. That also can happen if 2 merge and they're tied on the stock chart. The player who merged them gets to decide which is which. So if I merge them and Jeremy has a bunch of coffee and I have a bunch of gunpowder, I'll have coffee liquidate and grow the gunpowder.
So once the last warehouse is placed onto the board, that's going to signify the end of the game, and then all the players are going to cash out all the stocks that they have according to whatever the stock chart says at that given time. Remember, all the stocks that you have collected in your hand and any of the flag stocks are going to cash out. The person with the most money at the end of the game is going to win. It's that simple.
Yeah, you collect the money, and the only other penalty involved is any cards you might have in your hand, because you don't want to collect a bunch of building cards and think, I'm just going to sit on these things, because those are going to give you negative money at the end of the game.
So guys, that is Chartered the Golden Age. It's from Jolly Dutch Games, 2 to 6 players. If you guys have any questions about it, make them in the comments below. Check out their Kickstarter page for more information about the game, and we will catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.